Thank you, Jennifer, and it is terrific to be back here in Louisville and Kentucky. Yes, Robert, we are getting a little bit older. In fact, the early 90s, I had the pleasure and honor of working with a bunch of researchers to really understand CARA. In the mid-90s, when the National Commission Teaching America's Future was getting off the ground and began state partnership work in the latter part of that decade, Kentucky was a partner state. Maybe I met you and Phil Rogers for the first time back then. We were pretty young. I remember fondly working with Bob Sexton in particular. Those of you know are connected to the Pritchard Committee and his wonderful legacy here in the state. Bob was actually on my CTQ's board of directors early on in our development. It is great to be back here, and it's particularly because in the last few years we haven't had the pleasure and honor of getting to KVEC and the extraordinary work you're doing in rural Kentucky. But we've had the honor to also work with growing numbers of teachers, particularly a large growing group of teachers and principals now in Jefferson County, as the kind of revolution toward deeper learning for every child is beginning to take hold in this country. We still are working in a very old system and driving a car that's probably quite outdated in terms of its technology, but we're getting there, I promise you. And I'm hoping today, and clearly from what the conversations have unfolded so far, this group of folk here, this movement that you are igniting, is a place not only for us to build upon for the Commonwealth, but for the nation. And I'm going to tell you why. The vast majority of school reforms in the last 20 to 30 years, beginning with the standards movement that has its origins with Nation at Risk in the 80s, has had an increasingly and exceedingly, and I would say even overzealous approach to improving the lives of children in urban communities at the expense of kids in rural communities. Doesn't mean we should not be doing many of the things we try to do to improve urban education, but I know you folks know this, that 27% of all teachers in America, around 900,000, teach in rural communities. That is a big number. 25% of our nation's 55 million public school students are in rural communities, like the communities that KVEC serves. So I cannot thank you enough for not only putting a spotlight on the special needs of rural kids, their parents, their families, and the educators who serve them, but also on the fact that what you are doing, particularly with the Holler, is so important for the future of teaching and learning in this country. And I'm going to just, wasn't really planning to go there, but I was talking to, and you'll get to know Shaun Russell, a principal at Watson Lane Elementary, in just a moment, because I've got to give his school a shout out for the work they're doing. But I was telling Shaun last night that there is a new science of learning that has emerged of late that has its roots from research of Vygotsky and others for years ago. But we now know more specifically about how the social and emotional needs of children, young children particularly, activates their neural pathways and determines whether or not they're going to do well in school or not. And that research is there, and we're building more tools and processes to build on that. And you have created a network of educators, and I believe, if I can just get the words right, because I jotted a few down, a place-based social learning network that both allocates resources for children and teachers and supports the cultural understanding that allows kids and communities to take advantage of those resources. That whole conceptual frame for the Holler is deeply rooted, whether you knew it or not, in the new science of learning that is increasingly coming to the world of public education So thank you, Robert. Thank all of you for leading the way. What I was hoping to do, and this is going to make a lot of sense, hopefully in just one moment, to start talking about micro-credentialing policy. So what the heck is he talking about now that has anything to do with micro-credentialing policy? But I'm going to turn back to that research on the science of human learning. And while some of the research is now being applied directly to kids, both young and adolescents, think us as adults, as humans too, as learners. So if the science of learning says that learning is social, and the emotions that people attach to the learning is linked to whether or not outcomes can be achieved, that learning happens in more powerful ways when the learner is engaged in authentic tasks that he or she chooses. Right, Shaun? And feedback is critical to shape learning, and language, the use of language, i.e. public presentations, i.e. evidence that you might assemble in a micro-credential. Language generates thinking. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? If this is how we know young kids learn, this is also how we as adults, as teachers and principals, learn too. The micro-credentialing ecosystem, and I'm going to say this probably at least 5 times between now and the next 30 minutes, is not the end game. It is a lever for creating a learning ecosystem for both kids and those who serve them to drive the kind of outcomes that we know kids need to experience in order to be able to even survive, much less thrive in today's world. So let me try to do this to maybe help you understand how a scholar activist of the teaching profession got to CTQ and perhaps how we got to here today in just 2 minutes, if not less. So when we started CTQ almost 20 years ago now, growing out of the work of the National Commission on Teaching America's Future, most of our work was, like many nonprofits at that time, were very think tank oriented, and by the way, we still think a lot, but we did policy research and so forth. And that was the first part of our evolution. And what happened was a few years later, early 2000s, and my good friend Alan Young, maybe we met even before then, Alan, but you probably remember we were doing just policy research, and we became frustrated, and I know Alan was with me in that frustration. Even though, Alan, you were working with the union, I think, in Iowa at the time. Maybe? Is that possible? That may be. But here's the key point that we were experiencing, or the key pain point that we were experiencing, is that teachers were nowhere to be heard. Yes, they had oftentimes very good union representation, but here were unions on one side saying one thing, and school reformers were on the other side, and we never heard directly from teachers. So phase 2 of CTQ began in 2002 and 3 when there was nothing but listserv. This is 5 years before Facebook went public. We started, I think, the nation's first online community of teachers to share both their pedagogical expertise and their policy ideas. So that kind of grew into kind of the second phase of CTQ as an incubator, a grassroots incubator of teacher leadership, totally working outside the system. And we kind of grew that work. It took us a while. It took a while to find the funders, the philanthropists that would actually support teacher leadership in this way. But it began to grow, and it spawned a whole bunch of teacher leadership organizations and teacher leader activists around the country that I think we're experiencing, by the way, in a very good positive light right now, when teachers are coming, going open in public with their own ideas about solutions to be found to solve the problems that they face. That work, though, led us to principles like Shaun, which I'm again introduce you to even more clearly, and why I'm introducing Shaun here today. Principles are so critical to teachers as leaders that if we don't start building systems inside the public education where principals and teachers are leading collectively, we're never going to take full advantage of all the teachers that want to and need to lead the next generation reforms. So that entered CTQ's third, and I would say our current phase, of an organization that serves as kind of a catalyst and curator for collective leadership. And that work that really started moving forward for us in 2013, 2014, led me to a terrific set of conversations with a fabulous educator, Karen Cater, okay? And Odelia, are you here somewhere? Yes, from Digital Promise. And Karen was just came to Digital Promise at that time, and had already had the League of Innovative Schools, I believe, up and running, I believe, if I got my timeline right. But that work with Karen and the conversations we had kind of enabled us to kind of fit inside this growing ecosystem that she is building quite beautifully to help states and districts and networks utilize micro-credentials using new technologies to help teachers lead their own learning. And now we are very much engaged, and I would say about half of the work that CTQ is doing now as a nonprofit is working with districts and states to help them understand how micro-credentials can help drive both teacher leadership but also collective leadership. Some of our deepest work has been in South Carolina, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with at all today, and Jefferson County, right here in Louisville, where some lessons have kind of surfaced for us that really framed our thinking with this paper that Digital Promise asked us to pen of late, which I think is why Robert asked me to come here more than anything else, that was just published this week. Thank you, Digital Promise, for helping us with this. But it's our kind of landscape view of how we can utilize teaching policy to leverage the possibilities of micro-credential and where there are hot spots, including here in Kentucky, that can help drive this work forward. But I thought today, in the next 20 minutes, if not 15, if I can do this, I would love to just turn our attention to a credible school that's not too far from here. How many miles from here, perhaps, Shaun? 10 miles from here, because it occurred to me that it's not so much about how micro-credentials can drive the schools that we need and the teaching and learning that we need, but what do schools already look like where micro-credentials can help accelerate the really important teaching and learning that we seek for every child. Okay. So let's go to Watson Lane. And Shaun, you're more than welcome to jump in and correct me when I'm wrong and the like. So first of all, and thanks to Maddie Shepard and Alan, who are sitting right next to Shaun over there, I was asked to, because of some work we were doing in Jefferson County, to go on a visit just about, 6, 7 weeks ago at the most. It was in April, I'm certain of that, to visit Shaun's school. And by the way, Shaun had he's just finishing up his second year there, right? So, before Shaun got there, this was a school that was nowhere close to being a hotbed for how micro-credentials can accelerate teacher-led learning and deeper learning outcomes for kids. So when we think how difficult it is for systems to change, Andrew, we were just talking about that, this young man over here with fabulous teachers, 23 teachers and a community, have dramatically shifted the way they do business of teaching and learning in less than 2 years. So don't say that calcified systems cannot become uncalcified. So here's Watson Lane Elementary, small elementary school, about 300 kids, 92% free and reduced lunch. 23 teachers I mentioned, an AP, of course, a goal clarity coach, a couple of specialists. Shaun, I believe, I'm going to attribute this quote to you because I know I heard it there. A community that is very poor but also very proud. A few other points is a school where about 10% of the kids every day are absent due to life's toxic stresses that they are experiencing in their homes, okay? And that's a big number, so that's like 30 kids a day, maybe more. They're not there on a regular basis because of that. Before Shaun got there, traditional teaching schedule for most elementary folks, very little common planning time, if at all. Very traditional teaching as a result, very siloed teachers. Even though there was a strong personal community in that building, there wasn't a strong professional community. And Shaun's number one job, as he told us, was get the culture right first. Don't worry about the technical changes. Get the culture right first. And that's exactly what he has done. But as I tell you a little bit more and show you a couple of visuals, please note that the technical changes were extraordinary, and what he has created, that he's now calling Watson Lane University, is a driving force. Teachers already at Watson Lane, these 23 teachers, have about 5 hours of common professional planning time a week, okay? About 3 hours a month, there's teacher-led professional learning. Tell me when I'm wrong, I'll get the facts wrong, Shaun. And then most often, each month, there's at least about an hour of vertical team planning. But one of the drivers inside those new technical changes are some learning modules that Shaun co-created with teachers around the stuff they needed to learn to get to JCPS's deeper learning vision. What's it called? 2020? Oh God, that's next year. It wasn't 2020 when they established that vision. You have 6 months left, thank you. Okay, so anyway, it's these bite-sized modules around differentiated instruction, around personalized learning, around technology that almost in a sense created an organic community of teachers doing joint lessons, building rubrics, building new assessments, and the like. And most importantly, teachers recreating their classrooms. And what you find more than anything else is young children helping each other learn. So I just want to show you this quick clip if I can get it going. Now there's no sound right now, but this is Kelsey Carter's classroom, 5th grade, is that right? Kelsey Clark's classroom. So I'm no Ken Burns documentarian, as you can tell. That's my iPhone that I was using. But what you see, and particularly if you could also have heard some of the dialogue, are kids leading their own learning and asking each other for help. Teachers are no longer the sage on the stage. They are clearly have learned how to become facilitators, and they're learning together, including 2 4th grade teachers, I believe, who are sharing kids on their own accord. They have classrooms right across each other in a hallway, and they've really become a much more dynamic learning community, even in that corner of the 4th grade wing, because they figured out that those 2 teachers themselves, what their strengths were and how they could help each other serve their kids together collectively in a much more effective way. All started with this kind of culture shift and teacher-led learning around bite-sized, important pedagogical shifts that needed to be made. Now the question is, and this is fair, right? While Jefferson County is engaged in a pretty sophisticated micro-credentialing pilot, when we came to visit Shaun 6, 7 weeks ago, I think it was one of the first times you heard about micro-credentialing. Imagine what Shaun's school can do for the micro-credentialing movement, and imagine what the micro-credentialing movement can do for Shaun's school in Watson Lane. So just to put a fine point on all this, so this is in Kelsey's classroom. I can't remember the young lady. Alan, I think you generated this conversation. I'm almost positive. Alan, you were talking to a bunch of young kids at a table. I was standing behind you, and I heard, and I think these were like 99% her exact words. She tells Alan, last year we had to learn whatever everyone else was learning. Now what we do is different. We can find what we are supposed to work on, work that sometimes is not too easy, but not too hard. And we can meet the standards and get to work on even more of what we like to learn. This is from the mouth of a 10-year-old. And you could even embrace more of the powerful movement that's taking place at Watson Lane when you can hear these kids talk about the standards, talk about their joy and experience their joy of learning and meeting those standards because of the kinds of learning environments that are being accelerated in the building. So with that in mind, I want to again get us into a conversation here and to try to begin to think more deeply about how micro-credentials can be that lever for transformative change in teaching and learning. And so this is where we kind of turn to the nerdy part for just a minute, but very quickly I'm going to ask you to think at your tables about 4 key questions around 4 major policy areas that could both accelerate the kind of teaching and learning that we want to see, but also be accelerated by the micro-credentialing movement that we hope to create, not just here in the Commonwealth, but across the country. So first and foremost, and this slide here just represents a quick overview of some larger policy trends, which suggests that we've got a ways to go. Yes, 10 states are currently piloting micro-credentials at a state level, thinking about a strategy, but I guess that means 40 states haven't done so yet, right, Odelia? 24 states already have requirements for some type of performance-based licensing, and I believe Kentucky is one of them. Is that right, Robert? Or not? Maybe not. Yeah, it's still mushy. 24 states require it. I'm going to put quotation marks around requirement because it's pretty mushy in some states of what those performance assessments really are, how valid they are, how robust they are, and the like. 12 states, and Melissa Tooley, are you here to still? Oh, there you are. Melissa's organization, New America's, published a great paper on the state of the art and teacher renewal and recertification, so please go online and read Melissa's work. But 12 states require some form of individualized growth plan for teachers in order for them to be recertified. You can imagine, you're already talking about what that can mean in this state and some of the obstacles you've got to overcome to make that more of a reality. And then 22 states offer some form of teacher leader endorsement or license. Now, this means there's a good portion of states that haven't gotten there yet, and even inside these numbers, I would say, and that's a technical term, I think many of the applications are still very mushy and not very robust. So let's kind of get to the fun part, and I want to help drive in the next few minutes of conversation at your tables and then kind of whole group again around 4 big questions, one each in these domains that we've identified as key levers. And the first one is, how can micro-credentials offer a way for new recruits to assemble an electronic portfolio of evidence that contributes to initial licensure? Think about even a school like Watson Lane. If more schools were like that, how could new recruits assemble that evidence? What would it look like? So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes, 3 minutes at your tables, and I'm going to ask you to hopefully contribute to a larger conversation. Okay, so folks, here's Shaun.
So, whoa. So we came at it with the lens of what if K-TIP was not K-TIP? What if K-TIP became a 3-year process where teachers had initial licensure programs that they went through, but they were micro-credentials. So the state says there are these 3 or 4 micro-credentials we want every new teacher to have. And let's hope that some of them are about self-care. The other part of that is, okay, now you need to find 5 other micro-credentials on your own. Here's the entire suite that we have provided. You control your learning. You work with your cohorts who are doing those same micro-credentials. You assess your learning. You prove your learning. By the end of it, you've got a 3-year teacher who now has several credentials behind their name, and not to mention you have teacher mentors who are also receiving credentials for mentorship and helping young teachers as well. Ideological, I know, but what if?
Great. Anybody else? And while you think about what Shaun's table began to discuss, and got somebody else over here? Oh, yes, Melissa.
So we definitely believe that moving toward more of a performance-based assessment made sense versus just taking a test like the Plc'S or Keynote here in Kentucky, but wondered about how it fits in with other performance-based assessments that are already out there. So the EdTPA or tests like that right now have been based in research about sort of what are the breadth of skills that new teachers need, and so could we help them incrementally gain those different skills through micro-credentials over time throughout their teacher preparation process, as opposed to here's this sort of one big test, and maybe those 2 things could potentially fit together.
And by the way, as we walk toward Robert, so this paper that we were able to put together, and my colleague Ann Bird and I, with great support from Digital Promise and folks like Adelia and Robert Brown gave me great feedback. Jennifer Carroll, wherever she is, also was very helpful. It just occurred to me in the moment here, since we're recording this, I think some of these ideas that are coming forward right now could be part of some type of second stage sort of document, Robert, that could help us continue to unpack these questions and how we as a collective can begin to find some collective solutions. So Robert, you're next.
What's interesting about this question, and I accuse Barnett of listening in our conversation, we were having a conversation in the car on our way to dinner about this question. And I believe Cassandra here said, you know, there's a way the micro-credentialing can help with this, because at the end of the school year last year, one of our schools still had 12 openings that had not been filled because of teacher shortages in areas. So in thinking about micro-credentialing for initial licensure, and think about what if we had these highly skilled folks out there without a teaching degree, and we had this great job-embedded, competency-based plan through micro-credentialing, through a micro-credential process through the district, with partnerships with universities, whatever we need to do so that we can get highly qualified, highly effective educators into the classrooms for our kids, so that we wouldn't have this cycle of having to replace substitutes to keep the classrooms open. So looking at type of an alternative program, for example, looking at, in Kentucky, we have like 8 options of alternative certified, but how can micro-credentialing or competency-based learning plan fit into this initial licensure conversation?
One more, because we've got 3 more topic areas, domains. Anybody else? Alan. Never short of words.
It's not about how many, it's about how good. So one of the things I think that instead of thinking this as an alternative, I'd rather think of it more as a replacement of what we're doing, as if the praxis ever really shows us anything and is equitable. When we know that people, for example, learn in different ways and different rates, and what we're really concerned about is demonstrated competency, which the praxis does not show, we're keeping a lot of people out. And so when we think about folks who have, whether it's a second career or whether it's folks who have just not had the same kind of privilege to be able to go in and have and do well in a one-time sitting on an ABCD test, this is a much better way. It's to get people and to find out where we are and to let people know where they're going. But I also want to caution us, because whenever we come up with a new way, like it's a test, or like we have some other kind of new implementation of something, we often think itself will cover everything. This requires all kinds of support. And so I want us to make sure that we not only focus on the micro-credential, but also really on what Watson Lane and others have done. This is really about the culture and the community that we invite people in, and the micro-credential is really, just as Barnett said, the lever or a way for us to ground what our conversation is. So I think that that still is a way forward for us, but I don't want it to be done in a way that precludes, well, now we got it solved, everybody has all these little micro-credentials, now go and do them, and then we offer no support along the way. There will be much needed support.
That's fabulous. So just another quick point of data from Shaun and Watson Lane. Again, tell me if I'm wrong, but Shaun created Watson Lane University with about $30,000 of his Title II monies. Title I monies, excuse me, Title I, thank you, thanks. Just imagine now if some of the issues that you've begun to raise here, K-tip monies, all the money is being spent on Plc'S and that assessment system, how might we start thinking about those dollars and how they might be reallocated to something that's more meaningful and authentic and powerful for the field. So there's money in the system, folks. Let's go to the next one. We're not going to give it all the attention it needs, but y'all are helping this paper get better by the moment, Odelia. Okay, this is Melissa's favorite area too, but this is a cool one, and I really think about Shaun's school a great deal when I think about this question. How can micro-credentials be used to transform your current PLCs? And I'll just give you a little hint. One's PLCs that are less data-driven, perhaps, not the data are good, but they're more inquiry-driven. So think about that question. Then how can districts build internal capacity by using teachers as reviewers of micro-credentials? So those are two separate questions. So I'm going to ask you to maybe focus on one or the two, given this time. We have about 20 minutes left. But focus on those two questions, all related to kind of recertification and professional learning, that if we can find some answers to that, I think we can really change the world. So go at it for a couple of minutes, friends. Folks, I know this is short shrift. So I always hate doing this. I should stop the learning now. Stop the learning. Stop the thinking. Jennifer Carroll. I wish we had more time. By the way, this work is going to continue. These conversations and solutions are going to continue. Jennifer, I know you have your table had some good thoughts. And
well, we do have examples across our region of folks using their PLC time to help each other with micro-credential submissions. Yesterday we shared a few times about the work at Allen Elementary, where their folks have engaged in grade level PLCs where they were all working on that same micro-credential because they wanted to start to learn how to engage in micro-credentialing. But they also, through work they have done with us as a co-op through our Activating Catalytic Transformation Network, they have analyzed all all of their student data, all of the data, their demographic data, their perception data, their learning data, to really identify what's a problem of practice that they can best work on as a school to solve. And then they together identify that student engagement micro-credential as a first step. And so by working in their PLCs, they supported each other from gathering evidence to analyzing evidence to having conversations about how practice has changed, how student outcomes are being impacted. So they've definitely don't have that model that we see some places, and I call it the tail wagging the dog, where people are having PLCs for the sake of having PLCs. And we have to meet every Wednesday because it's PLC day, and we have to keep minutes, and we have to submit them to our principal whether we need it or not. You know, we don't have anything to talk about, but we're going to sit and look at each other for an hour. And what a terrible waste of valuable time where folks can really put their heads together to work on common work. And I think the micro-credentials, along with a lot of other things, give people the opportunity to do that. And then as far as that second question about how can districts build internal capacity by using teachers as reviewers, we're moving toward that model as a region. As we develop micro-credentials and we have successful submissions, we tend to know who those people are because they're talking to us about their submissions. This is what I'm working on. What do you think about it? And we can create those networks of reviewers where we can support them with a small stipend for successfully reviewing these submissions. The feedback from a successful earner of a micro-credential to folks that are seeking that micro-credential is so much more robust and so much more personalized and specific than coming from someone who hasn't earned it. You know, so if I've had a lead in developing a micro-credential, that's one thing. But when I've really implemented in a classroom with real students and real data and real obstacles and challenges and barriers, the feedback that I can give to a person who is submitting is so much more detailed and personalized.
Thank you. Anyone else? But before we do, I'm looking for a hand. Think about the challenge it is for a teacher who's teaching next door to someone to give that critical feedback because they have that strong personal relationship. Well, what Jennifer's describing here is kind of an ecosystem of reviewers across 22 school districts. If you think about it, the teachers in KVAC are part of the same larger community. They understand the cultural context. They have cultural understanding of kids and communities. So they have that close relationship to the context, but they're not so close that they can't give the critical feedback. This is a question that Melissa Tooley always puts in my ear, which is a great question, but this may be a way to address that kind of knotty implementation issue. So thank you, Jennifer, and your table for that. Any another table thoughts on these two big questions? Got them all answered? Okay. We'll go to three. If this is, hopefully this might get us thinking a little bit too. Okay. This actually is my favorite and I think one of the hardest questions. And by the way, my friends in JCPS, and I just saw Maddie Shepard, who's done great work with Shaun at Watson Lane. We were talking about this last night. JCPS, actually, its evaluation system is ready-made for micro-credentials, but it's really not being used at all. But I would like for us to think about, and I know we've had about 10 to 15 years, and Michelle Mills from Tennessee has done great work with teacher evaluation in that state. How can the last 10 or 15 years, which in many cases evaluation has become more of a compliance activity and not a growth activity, how can micro-credentials fit inside of that system and all the resources that get put into teacher evaluation? How can it be used effectively, but without turning the evaluation into a high-stakes, gotcha compliance activity that unfortunately some of the good ideas of the last 10 to 15 years got stifled by? It's a very powerful question, but we put a lot of resources, time, people, money into teacher evaluation. How effective is it? How can micro-credentials make it more effective? Go at it for a couple minutes, friends. Thoughts? A share out? Anybody? Ah, very good.
One of our biggest practical uses of micro-credentials in this situation has been principals who are working with a teacher in need of improvement, where they've identified something that the teacher, like maybe it's classroom management, maybe it's the really helping students understand the learning target. They've identified in concert with the teacher what the problem is, and then they use the micro-credentials because principals don't have a lot of time to go find resources to help a teacher. Even instructional coaches don't have a lot of time to do that. So whether it's the principal and working with the teacher in need of improvement, or it's an instructional coach, because we have a system of instructional coaches across the state, working with a teacher. Once they've identified an area that they think they could improve, then we either develop, or they use one that we already have developed, a micro-credential that gives that instructional coach or that principal the tools to help that teacher learn. So it's like, here are identified good resources, here are identified good learning pathways, and then here's a task that you can work on to see if you are getting there or not, and then we'll use the success criteria to have a conversation about whether that was valuable or not. So rather than an external validator somewhere saying this person did it or not, it's a sit-down conversation between the evaluator or the coach and the teacher, and that's much more powerful learning. But what our administrators are telling us is they need that support, that micro-credential, that organized set of information to be able to have those conversations deeply and well. So I think that's where a micro-credential, and it doesn't necessarily lead to a badge, it doesn't necessarily lead to part of even their formal evaluation. It's just a tool pre-made for me to use, and that's where our administrators have just kind of really gotten into using micro-credentials, because we have reflection questions at the beginning that they can sit down and talk to the teacher about, and then they have learning resources for the teacher, and then there's success criteria that helps them make sure that we're all on the same page about what this looks like and whether it's good or not. So I think that's been that, and then using them in conversations and PLCs have been our two biggest uses by our districts.
Fabulous, fabulous. Let's just kind of do a brief overview of this last domain of policy, and then kind of give a closeout and a kind of a hopeful beginning. So this last question, which we're not going to have nearly as much time to go in as depth about, is how might micro-credentials help policy and practitioners rethink compensation, merit pay, traditional career ladders, and the like, in ways that us enable to recognize more teachers to lead in a wide variety of ways. Now, if you think about a system of professional learning, and by the way, our colleague over here, forgive me, I don't know your name, but Sue, thank you, Sue. Sue just articulated so brilliantly really a kind of an intersection of a professional learning system where coaching is directly connected to the teacher-led learning and directly connected to the standards and the competencies associated with the micro-credential. Imagine a school system, and I know many of you guys at KVEC work on this, on serving the whole child and organizing a wide variety of people, educators, not just certified ones, right, to serve children. There's a whole array of non-education educators that we work with but we don't always recognize them, and they don't always become part of a full system of teaching and learning. Now, you probably can't see this in the cheap seats in the back, but our friends at Arizona State University that are also working on micro-credentialing and have been part of this work with Digital Promise from day one are now thinking about how we might think about, and I'll send this to you and give you a link to it so you can ponder it a bit. It's really fascinating. How might we use micro-credentials as a way to recognize a wide variety of educators? Yes, teaching assistants, but also what we call community-based educators. People that are in boys' clubs and girls' clubs, people that are working in other sort of social support agencies that are serving our children and families. How can those folks be recognized and their expertise be shared? And how might we start thinking about a teaching profession that is much more robust, much more diverse, and has many pathways and opportunities for folks to serve and lead without even formal designation. Robert, do you have something you wanted to say real quickly? 1 minute? Okay, I got 1 minute. So that's perfect. So that's the big idea there. That's going to require a huge, heavy lift. But I will say, just like everything else, everything that is being done, everything that needs to be done, excuse me, is already being done, my friends. Somewhere in Kentucky and somewhere across the United States. So let me remind you that for us to go forward in a powerful way, there are 5 big issues we close our paper out with, to making sure we pay attention if we want micro-credentials to work well. We first got to control for quality. Not all micro-credentials are the same. We need some type of arbitration of what's good, bad, and maybe not so good. We need to make sure that we count what matters and don't count what doesn't matter, which has been the problem in the recertification business for many, many years. We need to find time for teachers like Shaun has, and even more. Shaun and his teaching colleagues are at the tip of the iceberg of finding more time for teachers to lead their own learning. In just one short year, they found 5 hours and more a month, or more than that, a week, excuse me. There's more to be found and to be utilized. We got to find ways to do this, to recognize teachers. We got to also find ways to design this work locally. One design principle must be teachers must not just buy into this, teachers have to co-own it and co-create it. If teachers are not there from day one, it ain't gonna work, my friends. And I think all of you know this, but stay true to that principle. 2 quick, hopeful notes. And these data are not quite as new as they were a few years ago, but think about where we are in this country now, given where we have been, all those siloed teachers. 72% of teachers in this country are in some type of informal learning right now, outside their school systems. They're learning through Twitter, Facebook, and many other social media outlets. 1 in 3 teachers participate in some external network. And 6 in 10, I think it's probably 7 in 10 now, Adelia, or higher, much higher. This is from a few years ago. Teachers are using technology to connect to another teacher somewhere, somehow, right now. And then finally, this is one of my hopeful slides to tell you that we are ready for teachers to lead, because teachers tell us this. From a few years ago, and 1 in 4 teachers, or 23%, reported that they want to both teach without leaving the classroom, excuse me. That is a powerful number. That's 700,000 teachers in this country who want to be reviewers, who want to help their colleagues get better, who want to improve policies and practices. Let's give them a chance. Let's use micro-credentials to recognize them and leverage their expertise. Thank you very much.